Often called the square knot, the reef knot is a great knot for tying two ends of a rope of similar or equal size together. It's a great knot because it holds well under pressure, yet still comes apart easily when the pressure is released.
There are two big issues with this knot. It can cinch up and become impossible to release without an awl if under pressure or if it gets wet. And it isn't a great knot to join rope if the ropes are different sizes or the rope won't be under any pressure. Basically, it's a decent way for tying two ends of the same rope together, but not a great way to join two ropes together, as it's actually a pretty weak knot overall.
Start with one piece of rope and make a loop so that you have both ends close together. The standard mantra is right over left, left over right, and tighten. Voila, a reef knot.
The reef knot seems pretty simple, but everybody makes the same mistake their first few times around and makes what's called a granny knot. The granny knot can seem like a good enough knot, but it can actually be really hard to get undone when it's tightened, and with these modern synthetic ropes, it can come undone.
The granny happens if you go right over left and left under the right. If your knot looks like this, untie it and start your reef knot over again. Often, granny knots happen if you're the type of person that needs to tie the reef knot the other way around, which works fine. Left over right, then right over left. Either way works just fine. Give it some practice. If you've done it right, it should almost look like two perfect bends wrapped around one another. The reef knot is called the reef knot because it was originally used to reef sails. Sails have points with rope hanging off of it that can be tied together to lower the amount of surface space on the sail. These pieces of rope are the same size, and a reef knot is pretty much the fastest way to tie them together and still make them super easy to release when you need more sail space.
A reef knot that hasn't been cinched too tight comes apart easily by pushing in on the two ends. The two loops we mentioned before should release. Handy, huh?
Once again, to tie the reef, you take two ends of the rope and go right over left, then left over right. If you want to make this knot a tad more secure, you can add a half hitch on either side with the working ends of the rope. This may help stop it from slipping.
The surgeon's knot is a reef knot with an extra twist. This knot will come in really handy if you ever find yourself needing to tie off a suture, or, to more realistically, join the ends with a bend that grips while the knot is being tied. Its next best feature is the speed at which you can tie it.
The surgeon's knot is very similar in construction to the reef knot, with a simple addition of an extra twist that acts to help avoid slippage before the knot is complete. To tie a surgeon's knot, lie two rope ends in the opposite direction with an 8-inch or 20-centimeter overlap. The overlap will need to be longer if you're joining two larger diameter ropes. Tie a half hitch with the two working ends and then twist the working end that ends up on the right side around the standing end of the other one more time. With both working ends, tie an identical half hitch without the second twist. Both working ends should end up on the same side when this knot is tied correctly.
If they are not on the same side and the knot seems twisted, you may have completed step 4 incorrectly and passed the second working end under.
The same error that turns a reef knot into a granny knot.
Since the surgeon's knot is handy for joining ropes of different diameters and materials, it is commonly used in fly fishing to tie two lines of different diameters or a tippet to a line or leader. For this purpose, there is another way to tie the knot that is even faster. To tie a surgeon's knot to join a light line to a heavier line for a leader, lay the line and the leader parallel to each other with an 8-inch or 20-centimeter overlap. Second, treat the two like one rope and tie a regular overhand knot in the end of the line, pulling the leader all the way through. Do not tighten. Third, pass the end of the line and the leader through the loop once more. And finally, to set the knot, pull on all 4 ends of the rope at the same time. Many fly fishing experts suggest lubricating the knot with spit before tightening, but I don't suggest this if you happen to be a surgeon.
Another handy application for the surgeon's knot is for tying your shoelaces so they don't come undone. To do it, simply tie a loop knot like you normally would, but before tightening up, pass the one bite through the loop a second time and then tighten. Sounds complicated, but it's actually as easy as tying your shoes.
The figure 8 knot can be used for two main purposes. First, it's a great stopper knot.
Better than the overhand knot on the end of a rope, not because it's bigger, but because it comes undone a lot easier when you need it to. Climbers and sailors often use this knot to prevent a rope from running through a cleat or block.
There are two ways to tie the figure eight. The way I tie it is, make a loop. Pass the working end around the standing end and form a second loop. Pass the working end through the original loop. Now tighten by pulling on both the working end and the standing end.
I tie it a bit differently because I think it's faster this way. Start with a simple bite on the working end, and you're going to need it to be a decent length for it to work. Now take your flat loop and give it a full twist. Bring your working end down and through the loop. Tighten the rope, and there's your figure eight.
Both methods work equally well. Nicole's method's a little bit faster, but mine's a little bit more reliable for beginners.
The figure eight is also a great way to make a strong loop, and it's pretty simple once you have mastered a figure eight stopper knot. This is the standard way climbers make a loop because it's secure and it's relatively easy to release. First, make a relatively large bite in the rope. As you get better at it, you'll be able to gauge how big a bite you'll need depending on the size of the loop. Now, starting from further down where the working end touches the standing end, begin to tie a figure eight using both ropes together. Make a loop using the double working end. Now flip the double working end around the standing end. Then take the loop that is now your working end and push it through the loop in the working end. You might notice that your figure eight isn't picture perfect, but go ahead and leave it that way. In fact, the wrap that this bit of rope is doing is actually adding additional strength to the knot. Now going over how to make a figure eight knot with a loop again, make a bite in the rope long enough so that we can tie the knot using both ropes together, make a loop, flip the working end under the working piece, bring the working end up, around, and back into the double loop. Now you have a strong loop in your rope.
The figure eight knot can also be a very reliable knot for attaching two ropes together. This is also called a Flemish bend.
It works equally well with ropes of equal or different size and is more reliable than a reef knot, particularly with synthetic ropes that tend to be slippery. To tie a figure eight joining knot, start by making a simple figure eight knot. Quick review. Make a loop with the working end of the rope on top. Pass the working end under the standing end. Then around, up, and back into your loop. Don't tighten it yet because you're going to need it loose to attach the rope. Here's the tricky bit. Take the other rope end and you're going to basically follow the figure eight around with the working end. Start with the working end of your new rope. You'll need to keep the original figure eight fairly loose. Now from the exposed working end of your original figure eight, slowly knit the two ropes together by using the new rope to follow the pattern of the figure eight.
This is a bit tricky and might take a few tries to get it right. And if you're using two different sized ropes, it's easier to make the first knot in the larger rope, and the smaller rope will be easier to manipulate around. Let's review. Tie a figure eight knot close to the end of one of your two ropes, leaving the knot loose. Take the working end of your second rope and follow the figure eight by knitting together the two ropes from the working end of the second rope. Now tighten. When you're done, you should have a secure joint. The sheet bend is one of the oldest methods of joining two ropes used on sailing vessels throughout history. To tie a sheet bend, first, make a bite in the working end of the rope. Then pass the working end of the other rope through the bite and wrap it over and around the bite, being sure to wrap the short end of the bite first. Tuck the working end back under itself so the tail ends up the same side as the short end of the bite. To set the knot, pull evenly on all ends of the rope. If you're joining two materials or ropes of different diameters, as is commonly done with the sheet bend, make the bite in the larger of the two ropes. The final dressed knot will have both tails on the same side of the knot. If this is not the case, make sure step 3 is being done correctly, as it will result in a far weaker knot.
The sheet bend does have a couple of downfalls. They can both be fixed with a slight variation on the knot. Firstly, it can slip, especially when tying it in slippery materials or if the diameters of the ropes vary drastically. To remedy this failure, turn the sheet bend into a double or triple sheet bend by adding more wraps around the bite. This will make the knot more secure. Secondly, the standard sheet bend can also bind under a load, making it next to impossible to undo. For this problem, we can slightly tweak the knot to make it quick and easy to undo. Tie the sheet bend as you did before. Before tightening the knot, tuck the working end back under itself once more to form a bite. When tightening the sheet bend with a final tuck, only pull on the 3 pieces of rope and not the working end. This final tuck serves to make the undoing process rather easy even after a load has been applied, and it is sometimes referred to as the slipped sheet bend.
One last variation on this knot was seen on Greek ships where they used the sheet bend to join 3 ropes. To join 3 ropes using the sheet bend, first, create the bite in the larger diameter rope as you would normally do. Second, pass the 2 working ends of the 2 other, usually smaller ropes through and around the bite, making sure that they are not twisting or crossing over each other. Third, tuck the 2 working ends under themselves as in the standard sheet bend. Finally, to tighten, pull on all ends of the ropes.
The water knot is often referred to as the tape knot because it's a great way to attach 2 pieces or 2 ends of 1 piece of webbing. The water knot is often used by climbers to make slings and is a simple and effective joining knot.
To tie the water knot, start a good 6 inches from the working end and tie a simple overhand knot. Keep your overhand knot loose, you'll need it in a second. Now feed the trailing end through the overhand knot in the opposite direction. Leave a good 5 to 6 inches of the trailing end exposed on the other side. Now tighten. All this extra rope is because this knot does slip a little bit every time you use it. So if you need it for climbing or to hold something important, check the position of this knot after each use.
You can slow down that slipping by tying 2 half hitches in either of the trailing ends or wrapping tape around them.
To review, starting 6 inches from the working end, tie a simple overhand knot. Leave the knot loose. Feed the trailing end through the overhand knot in the opposite direction, following the knot around so you're basically duplicating the whole thing. Make sure you leave a good 6 inches on the trailing end as well. Tighten and wrap tape around the ends of the rope or tie a half hitch in both to help avoid slipping.
Just a reminder what a knot and a bend is. A knot is when you're attaching a rope to something, and a bend is when you're attaching the ends of 2 ropes together. Keeping that in mind, a fisherman's bend is actually a knot. The reason for this name discrepancy is it was called that long before the definitions and terms of knots were worked out, and because it's such a popular knot, the name had to stick.
The fisherman's bend is used for tying rope to an object and behaves excellently under the heaving strain of a floating boat, maintaining its security, and is perfect for personal watercraft. It's also commonly called the anchor bend as it remains secure in wet conditions once set properly and is ideal for tying to anchors. To tie a fisherman's bend to a ring, pass the working end of the rope around the ring twice. This will form a loop around the ring. Pass the working end under the standing end, then through the loops formed. Finish with a half hitch. Tighten by pulling on both the standing and working ends.
In cases where you may use the fisherman's bend to tie up a boat or something that will receive a fair amount of jarring over a long period, you can add a third bend to make untying easier. This knot is a handy one to have filed away as it can be adapted to a variety of situations.
The fisherman's knot is one of the simplest and most efficient ways to tie 2 ropes together, which in effect makes it a bend. But let's leave that behind us for now.
If you know the overhand knot, the fisherman's knot is extremely simple to tie and is suitable for tying ropes of different diameters. The ease of tying and its strength makes it suitable for even very thin lines. To tie a fisherman's knot, first, lie 2 working ends of each rope parallel to each other and facing in opposite directions. Second, tie an overhand knot with the working end of the first rope around the standing end of the second rope. Third, tie the identical knot with the working end of the second rope around the standing part of the first rope. And finally, to tighten the knot, simply pull on the standing ends of both ropes. The two overhand knots will slide towards each other and fit well together.
If you find that the knots are not nesting well together, you may have tied the overhand knots differently. You'll be able to tell if you did this because the working ends will both be on the same side of the knot. With the true fisherman's knot, the working ends are on the opposite sides of the knot. Unfortunately, after bearing a load, this knot can be difficult to get undone. That's why it is often replaced by the double fisherman's knot, which we'll take a look at right now.
Instead of tying two overhand knots as in the fisherman's knot, you simply tie a double overhand knot around the standing ends of each rope. This knot's popular because it's less bulky than some of the other rope joining bends, and it's still relatively easy to undo after being under the strain of a load. To tie a double fisherman's knot, first lie two working ends of each rope parallel to each other and facing in opposite directions. Second, tie a double overhand knot with the working end of the first rope around the standing end of the second rope. To do this, pass the working end around both ropes for 2 complete turns. Third, pass the working end up through the 2 loops you just formed and pull tightly to set that knot. Finally, tie the identical knot with the working end of the second rope around the standing part of the first rope. Tighten the double fisherman's by pulling the standing ends of both ropes. Similar to the fisherman's, ensure you end up with the working ends on opposite sides of the knot and that it nests well together. Anything different means you'll need to try and tie again.